Welcome, everybody. We're excited for today's workshop. We're glad that you all are taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. We have some chat box introductions that if you're just joining us, we would like you to introduce yourself in the chat box. Just let us know your name, what grade you teach from K-12 to higher ed, and what you hope to gain from today's workshop, something that you're excited to learn about. Okay, so if you put that in the chat, that'd be great. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to my colleague, Amparo.
Good afternoon, everyone. As a land-grant institution, the UCLA History Geography Project would like to acknowledge that the Tamba Gabrielino peoples are the traditional caretakers of the unceded land originally known as Tuangar, and which currently is called the LA Basin, and it encompasses the Los Angeles Basin all the way to the Southern Channel Islands. I myself live on Tamba land, and I hope to be a I very humbly say I would love to be a good caretaker of this land. And so I hope that I can learn more how to do that. And we can go to the next slide. We want to make sure that we share with you why land acknowledgements are important for your own classroom. There are ways of honoring the people who traditionally have lived on the land and who continue to be in relationship with the land that we live on. And we strongly believe that it's one step towards being in right relationship with those people whose land we live on, but also to in community with other BIPOC folks who are looking for ways of recuperating their land and having the land that was taken from them acknowledged. We want to make sure that we are in community with all those people who are looking to find ways of healing for unceded land that was taken or they were removed from it in the past. And along with that, we know that language is important. So if you're interested in looking at the importance of land acknowledgements, please visit Native 360. We'll put that link in there for you. I forgot to add it to our slides, but we will put that in there. And I am Amparo Chavez Gonzalez. Most folks call me AMPS. And I am a teacher coach. That means I go into classrooms, I plan with teachers, I foster a community with them, and then I am a lead facilitator. So then I get to do fun things like this and share some of the nerdy, geeky holes that I go into as part of the History Geography Project. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks, Amparo. My name is Danny Diaz. I'm the director of the UCLA History Geography Project, also a history nerd. I was a former high school history teacher. I taught for 13 years. And I've been here at UCLA for 7 years now, which is incredible. And I really love the work that I get to do here, bringing stories, oftentimes stories that have attempted to be erased or marginalized, bringing them to the forefront and sharing them with history teachers so that we can change the way that history education is done in this state, so that history is powerful. That's what I'm really passionate about. I'm glad that I'm able to do this work and particularly excited for today's workshop. I'm going to pass it to Cindy, our Associate Director.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cindy Mata, Associate Director, History Project. So excited to be in community with you all and to learn from Dr. King.
And then I'll just introduce myself. My name is Mark, and I'm the program coordinator for the project. So if you need any assistance during the presentation, feel free to message me. I also just put the agenda in the chat. So you should get it right now.
A little bit about who we are before we get into today's topic. The UCLA History Geography Project is part of a statewide network of history social science practitioners called the California History Social Science Project. There are various sites throughout California, including a couple here in Southern California, us and then the UCI History Project. So we're connected to this statewide network. And then we're also housed at UCLA not in the history department, in the School of Education at Center X, which is home to other subject matter projects. And Center X is social justice oriented. And we are joined today by both our faculty advisor for Center X, John Rogers, Dr. John Rogers, and then Dr. Anna Marie Francois, who is the director of UCLA Center X. We're glad that they're joining us. The project is guided by this statement of purpose. In our whole purpose of the work that we do is to collaborate with teachers. It's really important that we collaborate, that we don't hand down curriculum that's been designed by us for communities that we're not familiar with. We want to work in tandem with teachers and trying to be as responsive as we can to their communities and their needs. And we want history to be relevant and empowering for students. And if you're interested in learning more about the work that we do, you can click on the link in the chat, which will take you to our website. And I'll just kind of walk you through some of the stuff that you can find on our website. If you're here for the first time, you're not sure what we kind of offer in terms of resources, you'll see our, oh, I'm sorry, I'm catching some background noise. So if you can just please mute yourselves, that'd be great. I want to give a little bit. Okay, thank you. Okay, so on our website, you'll find a little bit about what we do. So if you click here, it'll tell you about the kind of professional development things that we offer. And if you are interested in exploring professional development, you can make a request on our website here. We also have, this is our most popular page on our website. It's our curriculum and resources. These are all free lessons written by teachers for teachers. A lot of these lessons were written by us, but most of them were written by collaborations that we've done with teachers in different districts, including our latest one that we're really proud of, which explores the local history of the historic Belmar community in Santa Monica, which was inspired by the scholarship of Allison Rose Jefferson, who is joining us in April to give a talk on her scholarship, and we'll be able to model some of these lessons there. We have all kinds of resources for different grades. Click down, download the lesson, good to go. We also have social media. If you just follow us at UCLA HGP, you can go to our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we also have a YouTube page, a YouTube channel, I should say, that's relatively new. And on that channel, you'll find, it's not loading right now, but you will find videos to some of the scholar talks that, oops, sorry about that, folks. So you'll see, all of the kinds of things that you can do from the comfort of your couch. I don't know why that's loading, but we have a lot of great resources for you to explore. Okay, and again, the links will be in your the links will be in the chat for you all. All right, so let me just get through these tech difficulties I'm having right now. I'm trying to share my slide deck and it's not working. So let me hit refresh, because sometimes that works. There we go. All right. You all can see this, correct? Okay. Thank you all for being patient. And I've been complaining about this new machine. I'm sorry for going on a little tangent, but I got a brand new iMac and it's just not really doing the job it's supposed to do. Okay, we're back on track. A little bit about who we collaborate with. We work with school districts, local school districts here in Southern California. So you'll see at the bottom the school districts that we're currently partnered with, including LAUSD, Montebello Unified, Norwalk La Mirada. And then you'll see our community partnerships that we have, partnerships with local museums, and archives like the One Archive, which is the largest archive of LGBTQ history in, I think, in California. So we're really proud of these partnerships. Our Lost LA partnership is another one that we're really proud of. And we hope to continue building partnerships like this with folks in the state and outside the state to continue to push for improvements in history education. This workshop is free, and it is funded by the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds that are being used to address the impacts that COVID-19 has had on our students. One of the things that we believe strongly in is in culturally responsive pedagogy as a way to engage students, as a way to have some deeper meaning and learning. We pulled a lot on Zaretta Hammond's research on using culturally responsive strategies while you're doing formative assessments and introducing new topics as a way for students to access prior knowledge, cultural familiarity with the content that they're learning. And so this workshop is being funded by these particular statewide funds. Okay. Amps, it's me or you?
Go for it.
Okay, so today we did our intros in welcome. We're going to do a warm-up activity right now. We're going to look at the narratives that we traditionally use and to teach about Black history. And from there, we're going to segue and hand it over to Dr. King, who's going to give a talk on his framework we're all really excited about. After Dr. King's talk, which will last about an hour, then we're going to do some application. And we're going to take the framework and we're going to look at some of our state standards. And Amparo is going to walk you through a really great activity on how we can start to reimagine and shift the way that we teach Black history here in California. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Tamps.
Hi, everyone. So one of the things that we want to think about is what are those histories that we have learned and that we share with the students that we work with and with other people in our community. So I would like you to think about this idea of this tiny history. And it's really summarizing the way that we have been taught African-American history, Black history, and then we're going to talk about what does that mean. So let me give you an example, for example, and this comes from the very amazing, cool Julian Bond. He believes that the way that Black history has been taught in the United States, it's been 3 sentences. Rosa sat down, Martin stood up, and the white kids came down and saved the day, right? And that's what he would tell many of us, that's what we were taught about Black history. So if you could take a moment and think of a short phrase that summarizes how Black history has been taught to you, we invite you to please put that in the chat. Thank you, T. I see. Okay, we've come a long way. We have a long way to go. Nat Turner, yes, Nat Turner killed plantation owners, and then, you know, that was really bad, and then not much more. Right, thank you. This idea that there's holidays and there's significant people and it's MLK, and then we kind of stop there. Yeah, there was an end to slavery, there was a struggle for equal rights, and then there was Brown versus Board. MLK had a dream, yes, right, right. Something about Black Panthers. Some of our teachers were able to get to the 60s, yes. Right, there was King, there was Brown versus Board, John Marshall, there was a little bit of Black Panthers, right? Absolutely, right. And then we have that the civil rights movement was supposed to help us enforce what was not enforced after the Civil War, right? And the violations of those amendments. Thank you. Yes, many of us did not learn very much Black history, right? Right. There was this idea that we're good. We don't need to go there. Things are great, right? We just all need to keep on going, right? Absolutely. I think that that is definitely what a lot of us were taught. Wonderful. Right, and then I see, yeah, the Civil War wasn't about slavery, it was about state rights, right? Yeah, this white settler version of Black history, right? a lot of myths that we were taught. And that's kind of how we were left, right? In a lot of different ways. The stories that we got were monolithic. There were one version. There were the version that was written in the textbooks, and they're very short blurbs for many of us. Thank you. Yes. I think a lot of us wanted more, and we were hoping we would get more as we were growing up as kids, as we looked around our communities, our friends, and that didn't always happen. So thank you so much. We appreciate you sharing. Daniel, can we go? So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is that our tiny histories reflect these narratives that we've all grown up learning. And if Daniel, you can click, I'll talk quickly so we can get to our speaker, right? So this idea that racism has caused all this suffering, and, you know, communities of color, Black communities in the United States, they've just endured, right? This idea of victimization, right? No agency, no self-power. There's just been a lot of suffering. Okay, go on. You know, once in the West Coast, we like to this mythology, right? Like, yo, all that racism was in the South. If you came out West, you were good, right? So once you left the South, you were good. This idea, right, that we have this mythology on the West Coast that, hey, we didn't do any of that horrible stuff. Go ahead, Daniel. Right. And then we talked about this a little bit. So a couple of people mentioned it, right? We teach Black history during Black History Month. The rest of the year, you know, we've got all these other standards that we got to deal with. Go ahead. You can go faster, right? You know, if we just look at people who overcame, right? Like people who like, they didn't let this nonsense get in their way. They're good role models. Look, they're good role models for everyone. That's what we got to do, right? And if only people would adhere to those good, peaceful, non-violent civil rights folks, then, you know, we could make a lot more progress, right? We wouldn't have all this tension. And these were part of the stories that these narratives that our textbooks, you know, promoted, that many of us were taught, right? And this other idea that you got to pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, you know, I know I certainly learned in my family, you know, stop your crying, you just got to work hard, and you got to learn how to navigate the system, and you're going to be okay. Go ahead. Right. And those times where we did celebrate Black history or looked at Black stories, we looked mainly at contributions of athletes, music, art, and, you know, some of those heroes, right? MLK, Rosa, Marshall, you know, when those were highlighted, that's what we learned. And there's a lot of conversation and talk about this idea of the quest for freedom, right? That this is one of those narratives that we constantly are taught and is replicated in schools, right? That's what the history of Black America is this quest for freedom. And that's what we need to share with young people. Yes, as long as I tell people I'm from way south. And people always tell me, like, what do you mean you're from way south? I said, I'm from Mexico. That's way south. They look at me like, what? So I'm sorry about that. Yes, right. So this is important. We got to think about what are those frameworks, narratives that we've internalized as teachers and adults, and how are we sharing those with young people? As little as first and second graders, and of course into our TEP courses and in the colleges where our young people are learning, and then internalizing and taking those narratives with them as they go into teaching as well. So thank you very much. I wanted to throw these out there because I think that Professor King is going to really blow our minds and have us think about how do we decolonize our own minds and get rid of some of these in our heads, right? And how do we shift our thinking? And so with that, I want to open it up for Daniel to please introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, Amparo. A couple of things before I introduce Dr. King. We do have some guiding questions, some things for you to think about during today's presentation. the one thing is thinking about the frameworks and the narratives that we just heard. Oh my God, it's raining. And clearly we're in need of a new framework, a new way of approaching. So one of the questions is, how can I start to shift the way that I teach about Black history, right? So that I'm not relying only on the hero narratives or the Freedom Quest narrative, or just overemphasizing victimization and oppression. And then how can I reimagine my teaching as a whole, so that I'm starting to center and uplift the perspectives, voices, accomplishments, successes of Black folks, and you can also say in other folks, in all aspects of your planning, from units to lessons to even your pedagogy, the pedagogy that you use to approach and teach your course. So it is my honor, my privilege to introduce you all to Dr. LaGarrett King. Dr. LaGarrett King is recently transitioned to a new position at the University of Buffalo. He's now the director of the K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education, History Education. It's an amazing name for a center. We need more centers like this. So it's just awesome to have somebody representing this kind of work. Dr. King joined the University of Buffalo last month, early in January 2022. He was previously the Isabella Wade Lyda and Paul Lyda Professor of Education at the University of Missouri. He received his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin after an 8-year teaching career in Georgia and Texas. His primary research interest examines the teaching and learning of Black history in schools and society. He also researches critical theories of race, teacher education, and curriculum history. He's an internationally recognized award-winning scholar of Black history education. He received 2 early career scholar awards for the critical issues in curriculum and cultural studies special interest group of the American Educational Research Association, or AERA, and the College and University Faculty Assembly of the National Council for the Social Studies. He was also awarded one of the prestigious Emerging Scholar of the African Diaspora Award, the Comparative and International Education Society Special Interest Group. He has over 60 scholarly articles and book chapters published in such scholarly journals like Theory and Research in Social Education, Race, Ethnicity, and Education, the Journal of Negro Education, Teaching Education, and the International Journal of Qualitative Studies. Please give a round of applause, either through emoji or unmute and clap, for Dr. LaGarrett King.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let me see, let me start to share my screen here. I really appreciate the introductions. You know, when people say that I'm gonna blow minds, there's always gonna be someone who's gonna be hating and be like, my mind just was tickling. So, hopefully I can start some dialogue, with people, and have you kind of rethink the ways that we understand and approach Black history education. And again, my name's LaGarrett King. I'm just a boy for Baker, Louisiana, trying to get a little bit more popular than our most populous alumnus, Don Lemon. Despite the fact he doesn't represent Baker, I represent Baker, Louisiana. So y'all tell that to everybody back home and such. So I'm so excited to kind of share some thoughts with you all, and very excited to be in conversation with you all about rethinking how we understand Black history education within our schools. So I'll talk a little bit about the center that was mentioned by Danny earlier, and then kind of get into the presentation, provide, some resources I find that are useful, right? And we'll have some questions, answers, and conversations, right? And big shout out to Leo, who is on the call today, one of the center's newly Bethune teachers who will be kind of master teachers for the center. So hopefully we can get some more West Coast folk to join us at the center. Very excellent educator and a big time, shoe person, right? Classic shoes. And I And I really appreciate shoe people because I just can't wait on a lottery and all that stuff. And it's just so, you know, one of these days I'll step up my shoe game. So I am associate professor of social studies education, a consultant, as well as a center director over UB Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education. And we have four basic missions here at the center. It's to provide quality research where we try to get at the question, what is Black history, right? And while a lot of people understand the problematic aspects of Black history, what we're trying to do is figure out, well, what's the best things going on with Black history? Who are the exemplar teachers? What are the exemplar curriculum and instructional approaches that our teachers around the country are using in terms of exploring notions of Black history education, right? So we do this through domains of curriculum instruction, teacher education, student learning, educational policy, the psychosocial development, as well as community education and activism. We also provide educational services, usually through our professional development opportunities, student learning opportunities, community engagement, and also learning how to research race. Very important is the whole notion of networking. There's several different people I know in the LA area. There's several really good Black history educators around. We had a few presented at our conference last year. And we have all types of Black history educators all around the world. The problem is we don't know each other, right? So the center is kind of used as that place where we can share space and collaborate and share research resources and collect. And then the whole notion of advocacy for Black history with teachers and students. And I think there's going to be some links in the chat for you all to check out the center whenever you have an opportunity. Some of our research opportunities here are the Black History Nerds. We've been rocking and rolling in February just to give you a little taste of what we do. And this Saturday will be our last one with Dr. Goldie Muhammad, and we're very excited for that. But these were some bomb nerd series. We're just a bunch of nerds on a Saturday morning learning about Black history. So come join us. This Saturday. We have about 400 people registered for this Saturday's group. Also on March 15th, we have this notion of researching race, where we have Dr. Roman Goings going to talk about those who are writing their dissertation and how do we kind of understand race within that. Our granddaddy, our signature, our Super Bowl of professional developments will be our Teaching Black History Conference. This is our 5th one, and I'm I get very sentimental with the Teaching Black History Conference because this has been a dream of mine for over 10 years. And when we started 5 years ago, I was so happy with what transpired. Hey, now in our 5th year, we gather hundreds of teachers. I think the most teachers we had was 1,007 teachers come from around the world to learn about the best practices of Black history, and is a space for us to engage, collaborate, resource, and you know what? Just be some doggone good old people right there, right? So this year will be hybrid, so there will be some in person as well as some hybrid aspects. So come out to Buffalo. I mean, lots of real good Black history out in Buffalo. As you can see, these were our past 4 conferences, and this year our conference is Mother Africa, right? To hit up our anniversary, and I'm so excited about our speakers, Dr. Wande Achebe, Dr. Gloria Butte, and then Dr. George Johnson. But our stars of our shows are our teacher workshops led by K-12 educators from around the country and around the world, because I know we're gonna have some Canada people there. All right, great. All right, people, let's go ahead and get into this. Since we have some teachers here and I want to hear you talk, I want to start off with a quick video, right, that kind of illustrates what I think kind of goes on within classrooms today as we begin Black History Month, where we teach Black history, and then I'll have a question for you afterwards, okay? All right, so I want to ask you all, and it's okay if you unmute and talk a little bit to me, but what did you notice and how does this video relate to how we understand Black history in schools today? Feel free to unmute and talk with me, and or if you want to put it in the chat, that's fine as well, but I like the conversation aspect.
Well, I just noticed how happy the white students were at certain parts of that, and how real uncomfortable they got. It just made me think about this. I forgot what state it is, but they have that bill where you can't make kids feel uncomfortable about.
Yeah, I mean, let's think of the music as a metaphor, right? Nice little hippie tune, everyone, nice happy tune. People are smiling. Hey, we're going to teach Black history today. Everybody's like, oh, yes, great. And then that sense of comfortability comes in when he says Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman. Great, great. These are the people that we're comfortable with. They're non-threatening in terms of ways in which we explain them. And we can sit down and guess what? We can feel good about ourselves because we sat down and listened to the only 3 Black kids in class talk about these African-American heroes. What else? What else? What else we have?
Seems to be strictly entertainment value. It also reminded me of going to see Black Klansmen a couple summers ago in an area that was predominantly white, and listening to them laugh as they watched the movie.
So a good question that teachers, right, will have to ask ourselves is, when I'm teaching, Black histories, or I'm teaching any ethnic histories, who am I teaching it for? Right? Like who's the audience? And while we can say, oh, well, my class is predominantly Black, predominantly Latino, Asian, whatever the case may be, or my class is, predominantly white, our job is not necessarily to teach towards the class, right? Our allegiance is to knowledge, and however that knowledge is kind of displayed, right? Because we definitely don't want to be a caricature, right? Or part of what Leo said, entertainment value. Anyone else? We'll take one more comment.
Well,
I think we have some comments in the chat.
Okay.
I'm just gonna say that it seems like it's an event and it should be fun.
Okay. All right.
It's
All right.
an event that just happens at one point in time, and it should be very fun and jovial.
Yeah. I mean, Black history is a lot of things, right? But sometimes it's so joy kind of connects in that, because of course Black history can't be simply about oppression, right? But then there's a delicate balance, right, between those particular approaches, right? And especially when we deal with certain types and certain forms of knowledge, right? How do we kind of approach those particular topics? And in essence, can some topics ever be fun, right? So I get these questions a lot about, well, how can we teach something without harming students, right? And the difficult thing about various different histories, right, is that history is already psychologically violent, right? Meaning that there's going to be some complex emotions that are going up. I mean, if history is divisive, if history education is divisive, that it simply means that our history is divisive, right? Our history is problematic. Our history is psychologically violent, right? The beautiful thing about history is that you don't have to indoctrinate, you just show proof, right? But the problem with the psychological aspects of history curriculum is that psychological violence has been one-sided, particularly when we talk about notions of Black history, right? Meaning that in many ways, our history curriculum, when we focus on Black history and ethnic histories, is that we continue to humanize the oppressor and continue to dehumanize those who have been oppressed, right? I'm only 43, but I remember in classrooms where the teacher would say, well, you know, these slave owners, right, or masters were just men and women of their times. And which now as an older adult, I'm like, well, okay, we use that excuse all the time, but there always been abolitionists. And these slave owners, these abolitionists knew each other because we have the documentation to show that they knew each other and were talking to them. Even had conversations in state governments, national governments about this, abolitionists versus slave owners. So they knew, so saying that they were men and women of the times is just saying they made the choice. And whatever that choice was or is or whatever, they still made the choice. I've heard, well, not all slave masters were mean and to their kids and to their slaves, et cetera, et cetera. They were good. It was like a family. It was this, and they were well taken care of. This that continued notions of humanizing those who live to oppress, right? But then on the flip side, we know nothing about the enslaved. All we know is, oh, they may have gotten beat. They may have, they were happy to be slaves, right? Some people ran away in Harriet Tubman, right? We don't know, we do not humanize the enslaved. We don't humanize Black folk in many different ways. So we are learning this, and I'm speaking of this in the context of various different anti-history laws that are springing up around the country. It looks like from the latest research that at least half the country has had some form of anti-history laws or pending anti-history legislation going on within the United States, right? And of course, we all know that this is dangerous. We all know that not learning history is a very dangerous proposition, right, that we have. And in many ways, we can say, wow, I'm shocked that this is even going on. But in many ways, we're not shocked that this is going on because this is not new. Number one, nothing beats a good culture war, right? Nothing beats a good culture war. The same thing that happened in the late 80s and 1990s with multiculturalism and Afrocentric education, it's the same thing happening now. The same thing that happened in the 1960s around K-12 Black history education, it's the same thing happening now. The same thing that happened in the 1950s with anti-communists and teacher loyalty oaths, where 600 teachers around the country were fired because they wouldn't sign those damn things under the suspicion that they were communists. The same thing happened in the 1920s and 1930s when state legislators banned certain history textbooks. Charles Beard, Harold Rugg, all these quote unquote progressive educators. So we have a history of certain politicians and certain people that simply do not want knowledge that speaks against kind of this progressive nation state. And we see these news stories, the school boards and crashing the school board. I had a real good friend that said that he's a DEI director at one school district in Missouri, and the parents stormed the school district building, pushed through the security and wanted to get at. I'm like, they're going to push up to the wrong person and get knocked out one of these days. But we see, and I will stand by this, the minority of people making ruckus, but our country has a history of kowtowing to the minority of white folk. Right? But this backlash that's happening around here is something that's not new, right? We can trace it all the way back, but more in contemporary times. I just say folk were just mad because we had a Black president for 8 years. Nothing to do with, 1619 Project, Black Lives Matter, all that just irritated people. Stop Asian hate, all these particular aspects. It's just something about the identity of the country. And I'm reminded by this through James Baldwin, which in 1963, I believe, we could say this in 2022 and not miss a beat. It's not really a Negro revolution that's upsetting the country. We can talk about 1619 Project, we can talk about CRT, we can talk about Black Lives Matter. It's not the Negro revolution that's upsetting this country. What is upsetting the country is a sense of its own identity. If, for example, one manages to change the curriculum in all schools so that Negroes learn more about themselves and their real contributions to this culture, you'll be liberating not only Negroes, you'll be liberating white people who know nothing about their own history. And the reason is that if you are compelled to lie about one aspect of anybody's history, you must lie about it all. If you have lied about my real role here, if you have to pretend that I hold all that cotton just because I loved you, then you have done something to yourself. You are mad. I contend that all this anti-history stuff is not necessarily about Black folk or people of color. They could give a damn about us. But it's that white folk was beginning, for whatever reason, to start questioning our country in ways that made people in power scared. Because the minority of white people to control this country is only given to the majority of white folk who are apathetic about what happens to people of color. So there's a lot of people mad, but why are they mad, right? And why are they fighting against history? Is because in many ways, as a country, as teachers, we don't even know what history is, right? And I think it's important for us to understand, particularly as we talk about Black history, right? And all these ethnic-specific histories have a history that I think teachers need to really explore. We've been trying to do this Black history thing since the 19th century. Black teachers in the North were teaching Black history to their students in the North. After emancipation, Black teachers in the South, Black parents, Black communities, one of the first things they did, right, was to create schools, to build schools, to learn how to read, and they learned how to read through Black history. They had to write R-I-G-H-T and write W-R-I-T-E, the correct historical record. One of the first Black history textbooks was written in 1890 by Edward A. Johnson for his predominantly Black school. He was a principal and lawyer in North Carolina. You have Booker T. Washington write textbooks in 1901. We can talk about how problematic it is, but I'm going to put him on the right side right now, right? Lilo Amos Pendleton in 1912, W.B. Du Bois in 1915, and of course, Carter G. Woodson in 1922. We can go on and on and on and on, you know, up until John Hope Franklin in 1947. We're from Slavery to Freedom, which is still one of the top Black history textbooks used in schools. But we don't even know what Black history is. We don't know what history is. History is not about patriotism. History is not about national unity. History is not about making someone feel good about themselves. It's not even about making someone feel bad about themselves. History is about helping us understand our humanity, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the indifferent. There's no such thing as a history. And I'll explain that in two ways. Number one, history is not about capital T truths or capital F facts. History is about a collection, or history is manufactured based on the evidence that is provided. But when you live in a racist country, a lot of various different proof is destroyed, erased, right? So history is not about a capital T or capital F facts or truth. History is manufactured. I could fall out my chair right now and we'll have 21 different stories of how LaGarrett fell out his chair. History is manufactured. And then also, history with a Y, there's no such thing. History with a Y denotes a singular narrative. But we have multiple people, multiple perspectives in this country that look at history a little bit differently. So instead of history, I would say it's histories with an IES. That reminds us that there's multiple histories that make up our history. The problem with that, though, however, is that people have to respect those particular perspectives. And the problem in our country as it pertains to Black history is that people don't respect Black people's humanity. They don't respect their perspectives, they don't respect their interpretations, and they don't respect their lived experiences. So when you do something like this, all you're doing is proving what Black folk have been saying for generations. You don't care about our humanity. When we look at the curriculum, there's several different things that interfere with us understanding Black history fully, right? Understanding the humanity of Black people. First, Black history is seen or taught through European contact or colonization. We leave out thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history when we start with colonization or when we start with slavery, right? If we focus on notions of US history has several different origin stories. Yes, 1619 is an origin story. 1492 is an origin story. 1526 is an origin story. 1776 is an origin story. 1865 is or whatever date, 1919, origin, 1965, all those various different origin stories, that's fine. But if we don't start at the birthplace of humanity, then we miss out on understanding Blackness in its fullness. Black history is who breaks into white society. Black history is who is taught through Black first, right? And that's damaging because what it says is that you're not historically important unless your proximity to whiteness or the white establishment. Forget all that history that you have beforehand. Your history starts within this notion of whiteness, white-centered education. And we do a poor job of even saying, why is this person a first? Because you indirectly teach about oppression. Black history is based on the triad experiences: slavery, Civil War, Reconstruction, and the Civil Rights Movement. In the next few years, it's probably going to be Barack Obama kind of connecting that particular. Black history is tied to suffering. Black history is towards the Black men who are heterosexual, middle class, Christian, able-bodied. We miss out on various different identities, and Black history are focused on these perfect messiahs, heroes, and heroines who are perfect with no complexity. And that is problematic because in many ways, our history curriculum is telling Black folk who we should be. You should be like this person that we manufactured as a historical messiah. In thinking about improving Black history, we have to understand that Black history is hard because we've all been miseducated. Carter G. Woodson in 1929 in his speech for the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History stated that instruction with respect to the life of history of the Negro requires probably more preparation than any other phase of social science for the simple reason that no other problems have been so grossly misinterpreted and so generally misunderstood. To undertake to give instruction in this field in which one is not prepared then would be a most expensive error for which future generations must pay, and suffering from other misunderstandings like the many which handicap us today. Again, 1929, we can move to 2022 and nothing has changed. Our handicap is racism, misunderstandings, misinterpretations, this notion that we're not necessarily teaching Black history. And I'll get to that in just a little bit. We have teachers that are constantly causing damage in the classroom because they don't know what history is. And they teach history through certain perspectives and not the perspective that we need to teach Black history from. In many ways, what we do is we teach about Black history, but we don't teach through Black history. And that can be used in all ethnic histories. Teaching about is teaching through someone else's prism. If I'm at the store and I see one of my wife's friends and they ask me, hey, how's Christina doing? I'll be like, hey, it seemed like she was fine to me when I left. She was smiling, she was this, she was that. But if you really want to know how she is, maybe you should call her. Calling her is teaching through Black history, teaching through Black voices, teaching through Black interpretations, teaching through perspectives. And guess what? You may not like that history that you have. If you actually teach through Black people and not about Black people. When you teach about Black people, you have mock slave auctions, slavery math problems, slavery recess games, slavery nature adventures where people are calling everybody the N-word and chasing slaves all around the wilderness, right? When you teach about, because you have no understanding about the Black perspective, because you're not teaching Black history. For example, when you teach about Brown versus Board of Education, many people learn that Brown was one of the best Supreme Court cases ever to be implemented in the United States of America, right? It was good, it integrated us, and that yada, yada, yada. We think very positively with Brown because we're teaching about Brown. We're not teaching through Brown. People wish that Brown was this celebrated Texas, but W.E.B. Du Bois said in 1960, the Black community had a problem with Brown before Brown wasn't even enacted. A lot of people have said that Brown versus the Board of Education was the worst thing that ever happened to the Black community. Brown versus Board of Education for Black folk wasn't about integration. They didn't even want to have integration. I'm going to give the NAACP some rope and just say the NAACP decided to choose to go with the fairness, equity, the psychological approach, because they understood that you couldn't win based on equity. Plessy versus Ferguson, they couldn't win on that. So let's try another thing. But for the Black community, integration meant going into white spaces. So that means Black schools closed. That means Black teachers and administrators lost their jobs. And guess what? We haven't even recovered from there. Teaching about Brown made us think that predominantly Black schools were horrible, are inferior to those white schools, which they were not. If you actually talk to older Black people, I have never heard an older Black person, I'm Black and I talk to a lot of older Black people, ever say anything bad against their segregated school. Not one thing. They may have talked about it was cold. They may have talked about it as a one schoolhouse. But that's what the Black community wanted, was fairness through financial means, not necessarily integration. When I was at Clemson University, I had a panel for people who were the first to integrate South Carolina schools. And there was a question by one of the students, and a real good question. The student asked, well, how did you handle racism, right, from your classmates? The panel overwhelmingly said, we didn't experience racism from our classmates. Remember, these people had to be in elementary school. Overwhelmingly, the panel said, we experienced racism from our teachers. Our teachers did not want to teach us. Now, what do you think happened to the quality of education of those Black students when they went to those integrated spaces? And just trace the history of the achievement gap, and you will see that achievement gap coincided with the full integration of schools. In many ways, we may need to rethink about whether or not we want integrated schools. I mean, that's something Black people have been talking about a whole lot, is teaching their own kids through their notions of Black history. But what we need to do is really focus on and understand that what is historically important to white people may not be historically important to Black people. The perspectives are different, the interpretations are different, the ways in which we see the world are different. And our histories are different. There's different entry points, different origin stories, different people that we learn about. And even if we learn about the same people, we understand them totally different. And people need to become comfortable in understanding that there's not just one history. There's multiple histories that inform our humanity in these United States of America. So what can we do? And I'm gonna fast forward to my principles because I may be lacking some time and I want to have some conversation with the group. I have a Black history framework that attempts to try to get at the humanity of Black people, that try to get at the consciousness of Black people, to move away from what I would call the white epistemic ways of knowing, right? So the Black history framework has been adopted by many different school districts around the country. And I have 8 principles that we need to consider as we begin to build Black history curriculum, whether it's in our classrooms or whether it's district-wide or whether it's statewide, right? So you cannot teach Black history, and this is principle 1, without teaching about systemic power, oppression, and racism, right? You just can't. There's no way around it. If you're not teaching about oppression, power, and racism, you're not teaching Black history. Those particular themes have been influential for the material realities of Black people today, whether it comes from education, healthcare, right, where they live, those systems have permitted thousands and thousands and millions of Black people, right, around the country. Now, you can't teach simply about oppression, but principle 2 focuses on this notion of teaching Black agency, resistance, and perseverance, right? Now, it has to be understood that Black people have always fought back, right? They've always been proactive and reactive in the ways that our country have tried to oppress Black folk, right? The interesting thing, however, with agency is that we have to understand that there's various different types of agency. I think people think of agency as only the physical aspects of agency, right? So they think of slave revolts, right? It's agency. Well, that's how Black people fought back. But Black people fought back passively. Think of agency in 2 ways. There's agency that wants to tear down the system, burn it all up, right? And then there's agency that says that I just want my working conditions to be a little bit better. I just want my life to be a little bit better. So there's subtle acts of agency that helps Black people make their life just a little bit better, and they live within that system, right? So there's 2 types of agency that we really need to focus on when we teach through Black history. Principle 3 deals with this notion about teaching Africa and the African diaspora. It's essential that we understand that Blackness is global, and that we need to understand the similarities and the differences of Black people worldwide, right? We need to understand ancient Africa and contemporary Africa. We need to understand a society, Black countries around the world, how these particular Black people are kind of structured, right? And as well as kind of understand Blackness in kind of nuanced ways, right? So in the UK, Blackness is a little bit different than it is here in the United States, right? Where the UK, like Southern Asian people, are considered Black as well. So their Black History Month in October looks a little bit different than our Black History Month in February, right? So those are the types of knowledge that are extremely important. Principle 4 is this notion about teaching Black joy. Teaching Black joy is what brings the humanity to Black folk, right? Black joy is just Black people just being Black people. And I think that's extremely important within our history, right? Now, I've noticed something. I've noticed when people, particularly white teachers, teach about joy, they're trying to get away from oppression. I also notice that a lot of people who teach about joy, it's very difficult for them to teach about joy because they just don't understand, or they see Black people in this constant state of oppression, right? So understanding a historical narrative that focuses on joy can be either very difficult or a safe haven for those that don't want to really get into the oppression aspects. Principle 5 deals with teaching Black identities. Remember, Black history mainly focused on Black males who are heterosexual, middle class, Protestant, and able-bodied, right? We've missed out on all various different Black identities that have been historically important, right? Principle 6, teach Black historical contention. This is the most controversial principle, because what teaching Black historical contention is that sometimes we overcompensate when we create Black history curriculum. We overcompensate because since we lack Black history, we want to make sure that we bring out the most positive aspects of Black history within our curriculum. But Black historical contention says that, guess what, people? Black people aren't perfect, right? Black people are susceptible to all the isms, right, that are pervading our country: ethnic subjugation, right, sexism, right, classism, all those particular aspects. I think it's extremely important to bring the humanity, because when we make Black history too perfect, that still is a dehumanizing approach to Black history. We're not making we're not teaching history as human. Now, I understand white teachers are like, LaGarrett, you ain't gonna set me up. I ain't teaching that, right? And I've had Black teachers say, well, you know, the traditional curriculum is so problematic that I don't want to bring that problematic aspect of Black history, right? But if we're going to truly bring out the humanity within Black history, we need to teach about the complexities of what it means for Black history globally. Principle 7 deals with this notion of Black social histories, and what I'm going to do is change that to Black social and collective histories. Too many times we teach history from the top down, right? Meaning that we focus on these messiahs when we should be focusing on regular individuals in history. We actually learn more history through regular people than we do when we pick one or two people or one or two events to talk about. But if we go through history from below, right? History, these social histories of regular people, we learn more about Black history than we do by just going up, down. And the last one is teach Black futures. All right. So we're teaching Black futures. This means that we want to use our knowledge of Black history to reimagine the future of Black people, right? So it's a project, it's a very complex project, right? It's in the higher aspects of our Bloom's taxonomy, right, if you will. But it's using our knowledge of history to reimagine really the contemporary as well as the future. It would be something dynamic, right, if we utilize the history of ancient African civilization to fix the Flint, Michigan water crisis, right? What did they use back then for agriculture? What did they use back then to fix fair? So using history to reimagine the future. Now, all Black future is, or Afrofuturism, Black futurism, however you want to say it, all Black Afrofuturism is what would Black society look like if white people just leave us the hell alone? That's all Black Panther is. That's all Black Panther is. If it wasn't for colonization, if it wasn't for, all these, interruptions, right? What would Black society look without all those interruptions? After the Civil War, when Sherman was burning down Georgia, he had a meeting with several different Black dignitaries. And they asked for two things: for land and leave us the hell alone. Right? That's all Black futures is. But the beautiful thing about teaching futurism, right, is we give permission for children to reimagine the future, because when they become adults, they've already did the work. When they take over this country, they've already did the work. The worst thing that a teacher could say when a student asks them, well, why is this the way it is? And the teacher says, or the parent says, because it's just the way it is. We don't give them permission to rethink why it is the way it is. But if we give them an opportunity to use their historical knowledge to reimagine the future, when they become adults, they've already did the job. And for us who believe that education is about transformation and not simply transmission, that's when society changes, is when we give them the permission to change society. So I'm gonna close. Some resources. I'll give Danny these resources, but I edited a collection in Education Week on Black history. There's 5 wonderful essays by 5 great teachers around the country. 4 teachers and 1 student around the country that you can learn about various different things about Black history. My favorite encyclopedia is blackpaths.org. There's some wonderful YouTube. Home Team History does African history, and then Crash Course in Black History, short videos, real good. And my book for this month is Teaching Black History to White People by Dr. Leonard Moore. Really good book, very clean book. I'm trying to find it by my desk and stuff. I'm writing a book, so I got like 9,000 books on this desk. But teaching Black History to White People is a really, really solid read for everybody. It'll take you about a day and a half or something just to finish it. So do I have any questions? I'll try to answer, but I would love to have a conversation as well. So I'll stop and see if the Peanut Gallery has any comments for me or questions. Or hate. I don't know which one y'all have.
Mute. Okay, Stephen, you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a treat. I can't even believe, this is such a great opportunity. And Dr. King,
what kind of treat? You just can't say a treat and just leave it like that.
Around here, it's dinner time, so my stomach is rumbling. But this is food for knowledge, food for the spirit, and big fan of your work. So definitely a treat on many levels.
Thank you.
But definitely, I appreciate the framework. And one thing it got me thinking about is, the aspect of teaching local history. Mm-hmm. So local Black history and the work surrounding that and the importance of it so that students can think about their own communities and the legacies within them on the ground that they stand on. So yeah, I was wondering if you'd be willing to speak more on that and maybe share any experience that you have with working with educators on that.
Yeah, so two really good, easy ways to introduce your students to Black history is through local history as well as family histories, right? With the local history aspect, I think it brings a really good micro macro type of comparison, right? So hey, we're studying the civil rights movement. Let's study what happened within our local context, right? And what this does too is that it brings out principle 7, right? These social histories, right? Because then it's like, oh, okay, well, Mr. Johnson, who owns the, corner store or whatever, did this in 1975. Wow, this is so interesting to students. So it kind of brings more emphasis on local histories, local people, right? To bring them in and make them a little bit more interested because these are people they know, right? So for those local histories, for those classes, invite those people inside your class to teach your class about those particular issues. Even if you don't think it's something big, it's something, right? Because, of course, y'all are in LA. So y'all got, Black folk from Louisiana, Arkansas, East Texas, Mississippi, right? Y'all got Black folk from all over them places, right? So there's a reason why they're there on the West Coast, right? Very few people just was like, hey, man, I heard that it has sun out there in California. Let's go ahead and go out there, right? There may have been a few people, but most people were like, hey, look, there's better job opportunities, right? Something happened here. We want to move there, right? We all have a person that no one talks about in the family. Like, oh man, George just left up and left. Well, why did Uncle George leave? I don't know. You got to talk to your grandma about that, right? You know what I'm saying? So those are the types of histories that tie in the student and grab the student, because of course we all know that for students of color, history is one of their worst subjects that they don't like. They don't like it, right? I think it has surpassed math, right? Mainly because we don't teach those particular histories, right? So that's the way to tease history, is to kind of bring in the local dynamics, right? And then kind of talk about the macro aspects. And then with the family history, what I want y'all to look up, and maybe Danny can set this up, but look up Christine Sleater's Critical Family Histories, right? Where she has the framework of when you talk about family histories, you utilize their racial history, their gendered history, and their economic history, right? And that kind of, you know, people move and their histories are all kind of based on those three aspects. Even your white kids, right? It's like everybody's racialized, right? Everyone has some form of gender, right? Everyone has some type of economic means that tie in to their families, right? I mean, someone asked me, it's like, dang, man, you going up to Buffalo? I said, that's where the money resides, right? So, you know what I'm saying? So those types of histories are extremely important.
Thanks so much. That's a lot to consider, and I really appreciate that. And I love the Christine Sleeter resource. That one is definitely a good one for the students. Start to think about contextualizing all that.
Noticed it seems like 2 new principles that that weren't on the original article. Do you want to talk a little bit about? Well, you talked a little bit about the future one, but there was the other one. Sort of what prompted those additions to your principles?
Yeah. I surprised you, huh, Danny? Man, Danny was sitting back like, oh, I already know these principles. What? You got 2 more? What? I gotta listen. But no, I talked briefly about this notion of social history, right? Learning social and collective histories. You learn history a little bit better when you teach from regular people's perspectives and not necessarily those messiahs we've taught to learn, right? So yes, you know, you learn a little bit more about the Nation of Islam, right? Yes, from Malcolm X, but you probably know more from someone who attended those mosques, right? You know what I'm saying? Like those regular folk that that make history, I think, is extremely important to learn more. And then, of course, with Black Futures, I talked about the benefit of that, right? Using history to reimagine the future. And I think the notion of black futures are good for project-based learning and problem-based learning, and you definitely use that for those, you know. But that the Black Futures one, I haven't wrote that chapter yet for the book, but is real high level, right? I'm trying to figure out how we can kind of use that, you know, for entry. Everything's a work in progress. So if you have some comments about it, and let me know. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
I have a question and a comment. You know, I really appreciate you bringing up the notion of connecting with community members, connecting with local residents, for them to share their histories and their stories. And, you know, that's something that I'm really interested and passionate about doing, and what I've done in the work that I've had in the past. But I have this like bias, I think, that, you know, is challenging, that I try and work through, and determining, you know, what could be a story based on someone's experience, and what might not incorporate facts based on the, you know, larger knowledge of history. And so I'm wondering, you know, how do you find that balance in staying true to, you know, honoring the stories of people, but knowing that sometimes that is a personal interpretation of an experience, a lived experience, which is valid, but sometimes bumps up against, you know, this larger notion of what narratives are written, or what documents can, you know, back what, you know, event took place. Because and then the people that I work with in the organization that I work with, you know, they often, you know, question some of the conversations that I have too. And, you know, well, do you have an article, or do you have, you know, a resource that could basically verify the story that this person is sharing? And so I just wanted to, you know, get your thoughts on that, because I know I deal with that quite often in the work that I do in historic preservation.
Yeah. So in classrooms, that's one of the first things that we do. So my experience building Black history curriculum around the country is that typically there's like a 0 week, right, where teachers and people, you know, talk about what is history, right, how history is written, what are the credible sources of history, et cetera, right? So even historians can be problematic, right? Even certain documentations can be problematic, right? The purpose of that 0 week is to demystify, right, and really bring in a more diverse understanding of what's historically important and accurate, right? Again, if your students or if the people that you work with understand that there's no such thing as a capital T truth or a capital F fact, then we can move on and say, hey, from this particular person's perspective, right, this is what happens. Just because it's a national narrative does not necessarily mean that it is the only narrative that we should respect, right? So there's various different sources, right, that include. So I understand, kind of the professionalism in terms of, oh, well, let's see where we have, but a person's voice and their memory is a source as well, right? And just because they're not white or male does not necessarily mean that their credibility is any less than that particular, historian that wrote that piece, right? So we give a disservice for our people of color. We give a disservice to our poor people. We give a disservice for all these identities that have been historically excluded of not being historically relevant, right? So my thing is always like, these histories need to be understood, need to be told with the understanding that memory, right, is complex. There's certain things you're not going to remember properly or right or whatever, but it does not necessarily mean that it's not legitimate or should not be respected, right? So I think that's just another source, right? So if it's like, hey, Mr. Johnson at the corner store, he's a source of what happened in the 92 LA uprisings, right? He's just another source for that particular history, right? And understanding that, hey, he may have left some things out. Hey, he may have over-exaggerated some things. That's okay, because that history book you have left out thousands and thousands and thousands of voices, right? You know what I'm saying? So I think the most important thing is to understand that history and truth, history and facts are kind of convoluted. And once you understand that, I think we can kind of move forward. Now, of course, there's lies, right? Or whatever the case may be. But again, that's the trouble with oral histories and the troubles with interviews as well, because we don't know if people are lying or not per se. And then what's a lie, right? You know what I'm saying? So I hate to be post-structuralist on you, but it's just one of those things.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone. If we can give like a round of applause for Dr. King, you could even hit those little emoji things. Thank you so much. That was terrific. And hopefully you could stick around, because what we're going to do next is we're going to transition to some collaboration time. And Amparo's going to lead us through what I'm calling a remix of our old 1998 standards here in California. So we're going to look at those standards and look at the principles that Dr. King has just discussed, and seeing if we can remix and update some of these standards so that they align well. So I'm going to let Amparo introduce this to you all.
All right. If you could please, we could go back to our slide deck. All right, wonderful. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was this idea of like, how do we localize Black histories, right? And one of these things that you'll have, and you'll get access to the slide deck, is how do we start thinking about California and Black stories, right? How do we think about those intersectionality stories that we're missing many times, that we don't talk about? How do we talk about Mr. Ron Finley, our gangster gardener, right? Who's doing all this work and helping think about how we heal the environment, how we provide food for our communities. How do we include people like Bayard Rustin, right, who worked very closely with Cesar Chavez in writing a pamphlet for the United Farm Workers in Spanish and English. And he was the orchestrator of the Civil Rights Movement and the organizer for MLK. How do we talk about Pat Parker, who's a queer Black woman who's also leading the forefront with the LA Black Panthers in Oakland, right? And she's also a member of the disability community, right? Those stories are not often told in the stories that we teach, right? How do we look at the BLM Youth Vanguard, right? And how do we support the organizing work of young people in our own communities, as well as talk about issues of Afro-Latinidad, right? We have, I found a Facebook group called Blaxicans of LA, right? How do we talk about those times where our stories are complicated and complex? And how do we support young people who are looking to make those conversations be in the forefront of the conversations we have as teachers, right? And so you'll have access to all these different ways that we're thinking about how do we add to our local stories, right? And so we wanted to give you some time to look at Professor King's principles. And we're also aware that he's added 2 more. So I apologize to you for those that you're not gonna get to see, but we did try. Daniel very graciously got him to talk a little bit more about them. So what we wanna do is we wanna give you a couple of minutes to take a look at this resource. And I'm gonna stop sharing, because if you can, before you start looking at that resources, tell us what grade level breakout room you would like to join. We're gonna have 5 breakout rooms, okay? And I'm gonna put them in there. We want you to start thinking about which one you're gonna wanna join. And if you are someone who's in higher ed, we're gonna ask you to kindly join one of these 5 breakout rooms, and we're gonna open them after you take a couple minutes to read the piece from Professor King that is in the chat. Okay, so if you can kindly, we're gonna give you about 4 minutes to just briefly look over Professor King's piece. You can turn off your camera if you'd like. I'm gonna put on some music, and when you hear the music, and we're gonna ask you to kindly come back. And if you're in higher ed, you're gonna join one of these rooms, okay? Thank you so much. What we want to do now is to give you some time to really think about how do we use these resources in our classrooms, in our own teaching, and our work with young people. And so you can see my Spotify list there. So what we're going to do now is what I've created in collaboration with Danny and with my colleagues, we've all been thinking a lot about this, is what I've created is I've taken the 6 principles that we had previously from Professor King, and I have put them on a chart. And then what I've done along with my colleagues is put, for each grade level, we've put your standards on the right-hand side. And so you can see I have several standards from 2.5, 2.1, 3.4, 2nd and 3rd grade are together. And so I'm gonna look at these 6 principles from Professor King, and I'm gonna look at my standards, and I'm gonna think about, okay, which of these can I start thinking about reimagining based on this template, right? And so how do I look at character? How do I look at folks who have done things that have shown character, right? That aren't the traditional narrative in my standard, but who focus Black stories. And so I'm going to go over to the left-hand side and I'm going to click. These are all hyperlinked, and it's going to take me to some documents about different people from LA and California who might exemplify these 6 principles. And so this is one of our very own, Robert Singleton, who joined the Freedom Riders, in 1961, and he brought a group of 12 people from UCLA with him, Black and white, to join the Freedom Riders, right? So if I think about him, I would say that for me, he exemplifies agency, resistance, and perseverance. I might also say, and I can copy, and then I can paste, is that if I wanted to teach using, I put John Singleton, I was thinking of the filmmaker, Bob Singleton in there, I would also think about that he's also someone that I can use to think about and to talk about oppression and the history of racism in the United States. And so what you will see, right, is that for each one of your grade levels, for example, this is what the actual 2nd and 3rd grade slide looks like. You have a lot of resources, and we're expecting a lot more people to come today, so don't feel bad if you don't get to all of them, but we're going to invite you to take a look at your grade level frame. And if you are someone who's teaching out of the classroom, you teach adults, take a look at whichever one you would like to join. And when the breakout rooms open, you're going to get a chance to go in there, play with these resources, look at these pieces that are primarily, I would say 99% about LA and California, except when we look at middle school, because we know the middle school curriculum in 6th and 7th grade is different. So I think someone's going to help me out, right? And put that resource in the chat.
Coming. And as I'm trying to cut and paste this, what I was saying, Amparo, is that there are some standards there that really need to be updated. And I was pointing out like 10.10 in world history. If you're all a 10th grade world history teacher, like, oh man, there's so many standards there that you can remix or reimagine so they align to these principles or one of those principles. And then, like Amparo said, we have a lot of resources and stuff to help you complete that process with infusing some new content, local content. This is the link to the workbook where you will find all of the slides. We broke them up by grade level.
And then Mark is going to open the breakout rooms for you to jump in. And don't mind, some of us will come in and out just to make sure, like if you have questions or you want to ask, we'll jump in and out. And
so we can, obviously this is huge, but this is the unit that she created looking at the successes and failures of the abolition movement. And she connected it to Black Lives Matter. And it's a really great unit that she's using to teach her students in Linwood. Okay, so that is it. It's 6 o'clock. We really would like your feedback. There's going to be an evaluation link put in the chat. It's also on your agenda. Please just let us know how we did and what we could do to improve our next session, which is coming up on March 1st. We're going to be joined by public historian Crystal Jackson, who's the director of the Pacoima Historical Society. She's done an enormous amount of research and she's interviewed people. She did that principle that Dr. King was talking about, and she's going to share about the history of Black folks in the San Fernando Valley with the emphasis on Pacoima. So thank you all so much. Please send a shout out in the chat to anybody that you were able to talk to, or just somebody that you appreciated today. And we'll kind of leave it at that unless I forgot anything because I'm rushing. Are we good? Okay, I think we are. So thank you all so much. Stick around if you have any questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening.
thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.